Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics. This week's questions answered video, how can I practice better? This is a topic I've touched on numerous times. And what we're talking about is practice with firearms and how to get better with whatever we're attempting to do. In firearms, we have three metrics that we commonly look at when we're trying to measure performance, and that's distance, time, and accuracy. And those three can be combined in any number of ways under any number of conditions to kind of give someone an appreciable understanding of how well they're doing compared to how well they used to be doing or how well they want to be doing or how well someone else is doing. If you've been to a class or you've been to a range or you have friends that you go shoot with, you know that everybody is to a certain degree at a different level of performance with certain things. If we're talking about a very specific topic such as, how fast can you hit a piece of steel at 10 yards from the holster, especially if you have a shot timer present, you know which one of your buddies or which one of the guys in the class is able to do it consistently faster than you are. A shortcut that you can take, and this is really the only shortcut in practice, is instead of trying to figure it out on your own, you can ask that person, what did you do to get there? And hopefully they're able to tell you. Because we're all instructors and teachers in our own right. We can pass along the skills that we're proficient at to other shooters in our own practice methods, which is kind of like what I'm doing right now. Practice in firearms is one of those things that takes an honest assessment of where you're at and necessarily where you want to go. Because if you don't have a destination in mind, you're going to wander you're just going to wander and you're not going to necessarily have a very distinct idea or roadmap into how to get to where you want to go. Because I may, as an example, have a desire to be able to get a headshot for concealment at 3 yards in, let's say, 2 seconds. But that requires me to understand what things need to be accomplished as efficiently as possible in order to get there. So we're talking about practice. The definition of practice, at least my definition of practice, is proper repetition of correct techniques until proficiency is achieved. And of course, the proficiency is related to exactly what's attempting to be accomplished. Using that example, and we'll use that example for the rest of the video, from concealment, headshot in under 2 seconds. So I've got an accuracy and I've got a distance. And I've got the proficiency that I have to go through in order to achieve that. And I've got my time, right? So if I take 10 rounds and I draw from concealment and I shoot and I fire 10 times, and let's say 2 or 3 of those rounds aren't necessarily where I want them to be. They're still in that cranial vault region, so I'm accomplishing my mission, but maybe they're really far to the extreme left or really far to the extreme right. Don't ignore those rounds. In fact, when you make that shot, think about what you did inefficiently or what you did wrong in your process that caused that round to go far right or far left. Don't just guess. Consciously think about the steps that you took and the small inefficiencies or small mistakes you made that could have driven that round further. A really good example is maybe you messed up your support hand sweep of your garment, or maybe your support hand came into the gun wrong or came in too late, or maybe you applied way too fast of a jerk on the trigger when you got your sight picture or sight alignment, or maybe your front sight post was aligned too far to the right or too far to the left, your sight alignment wasn't quite perfect, your dot placement wasn't quite perfect, your alignment wasn't quite perfect. If you recognize that, then now you have a metric that you can work on for your next rep. Focus on one problem at a time to build that efficiency. Everyone is at a different level of efficiency in firearms. Some people are still having problems putting the magazine in the gun, or maybe they're having problems reloading from concealment, whereas another shooter might already have all that down, or he's very consistently proficient in those areas, but he's having trouble bringing his .18 split down to a .15 split. They're both problems, they're just at different levels, and that goes back to saying that you can watch guys shoot and see who's better at something than you, and you can lean on them if they're willing and they're able to explain it to see how they got where they got. Deliberate practice is what we're talking about, and deliberate practice is something that has to be done, it's in the name, deliberately. So while it might be fun to go shoot 500 rounds in a class or 1,000 rounds in a class, the class is where we receive proper instruction of correct technique. And then we take that correct technique to practice at proficiency. So even in a class, you have to be thinking about the process. And you have to be thinking about, okay, I'm being taught this skill. How can I practice this skill outside of this range environment? How can I practice this skill without any ammunition? Because not everything can be practiced without live rounds. And then you look at how many repetitions is it going to take me to get there. There's not really anything such as natural talent. Now, some shooters have a faster aptitude for learning new skills than other shooters do, but that may only be in this one small area or this one small focus of shooting. They may have had problems elsewhere. Some people are going to adapt to certain concepts faster than other shooters are, and vice versa. Everybody's going to have a problem. It's just a matter of what that problem is going to be. And we were all amateurs once. I shoot a lot because it's part of my job, and I still consistently have small problems with some of the basic fundamentals. I have really bad recoil anticipation, and I say really bad because I'm my harshest critic. To a student watching me demonstrate a drill, he might not even see it, but I do, because I'm constantly paying attention to what I know to be my highest level of performance at my current skill level. I know that because I know where my failure points are, and this is another big part of deliberate practice. You have to know how fast, how far, or how inaccurate is too inaccurate. How fast is too fast? How far is too far relative to some kind of metric you're applying to what you're trying to do? If, just as an example, I'm trying to get a headshot at 7 meters from concealment in 1.5 seconds. That may be too fast right now, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop working on it. I'm not going to throw 25 rounds down range and decide, okay, I can't do this. It requires repetition. Repetition requires time and admittance that there is no shortcut. You're not suddenly just going to, it's not all going to fall into place within 5 or 6 reps. And if it does, you might bring it to the range next week and not be able to do it again. Because something clicked and you didn't recognize what you're doing right versus what you were doing wrong or what you're doing inefficiently. And that comes back to deliberate practice, recognizing those small mistakes. I'm pressing out. Am I doing a self-diagnostic? Am I recognizing my left hand isn't applying the pressure it normally does? My right hand isn't applying the pressure it normally does. My elbows are too far extended. I can feel the pressure in my shoulder blades. I messed up my draw stroke and now I'm rushing my shot, so I'm going to hit lower than I want to. Those small mistakes in the process force us sometimes, even subconsciously, to rush to make up time we feel like we lost. If we'd taken that extra 1/10 of a second, 100th of a second, we probably would have put the round exactly where we'd planned on putting it in the first place. But because we had a small inefficiency or small mistake, we rushed it. If you look at musicians, musicians do this same thing, deliberate practice. They're going to continue to do something until they get to a level of competency where it's second nature. And then they can take that second nature and apply it to something else, such as working in with other musicians and things of that nature. My understanding of music isn't nearly as strong as some of yours may be, so you may understand the process better than I do, but some of you may be kind of nodding your heads along like, okay, yeah, music practice can relate to firearms practice because there's appreciable metrics in both fields. Deliberate practice is something that comes from music, but that doesn't mean that we can't repurpose it and apply it to firearms practice, because the inefficiencies are the inefficiencies regardless of what the end goal is, regardless of if the instrument is a Glock 9mm or a violin. They're obviously two totally different things, but the methods to proficiency on both of them are very, very similar. Now, not everything has to be serious. Of course, you know, firearms are enjoyable and fun to shoot for a lot of us. I'm a very serious shooter, but I also like to have fun safely with it, such as friendly competitions or trying to do somewhat unrealistic things, but they're still enjoyable, like hitting a steel plate with a handgun at 300 meters. Not super, super practical, but at the same time, if I hone the proficiency on that and I'm accurate at that somewhat fun engagement, then I can take that same accuracy and apply it to whatever distance I happen to be shooting at, because the fundamentals are the fundamentals. And it does give you a greater understanding of what your firearm is capable of and how your own physiological relationship with the firearm is going to be better concreted by a strict adherence to practice and pushing yourself to your failure point. If you don't know how fast is too fast, how far is too far, how inaccurate is too inaccurate, then it's very hard for you to have a goal. And like I said, you'll end up wandering around or maybe not spending that hard-earned money the best when you go to the range to shoot. The type of environment you have to shoot in definitely does restrict some of these deliberate practices, such as drawing from concealment. A lot of indoor ranges are just not going to allow that, so you may have to get that in dry fire. You may have to do everything but shoot the gun in dry fire, and then when you go to the range, work on the actual firing aspect of it. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of the environment that we're in, especially in urban areas where guys don't have access to outdoor ranges or ranges that will allow free movement and drawing from concealment and more than one round a second and all these things. So there are some artificial hindrances to your ability to become more proficient, and that's unfortunate. But the methodology of practice remains the same. Have a mission, whatever you're going to the range for. Don't just go to the range, go to the range. Go to the range with a mission in mind. Even if you're going to spend a lot of time just shooting for fun, work on one thing deliberately that you know you're not good at. The things that we aren't efficient at, we usually stay inefficient at because they're uncomfortable, and they're uncomfortable because we don't do them. So it's this vicious cycle of inefficiency. Some shooters just aren't good at shooting one-handed, but they'll admit, I don't spend a whole lot of time doing this. I love one-handed shooting because my personal feeling is having two hands on the firearm is a luxury. When we talk about the handgun and just the realities of self-defense shooting, you might need to move somebody out of the way and work a flashlight, carry groceries, whatever happens. It may be a split second of time where I have to shoot one-handed and then I get my other hand on the gun. But the reality is there, and it's something that I appreciate. So the more efficient I can be at one-handed shooting, the more I'm going to appreciate having two hands available to me when the time comes. And that's just an example, but it speaks to having something specific in mind. What if you just go to the range and work on sight alignment? How fast can you align your sights? Can you reaccommodate threat, front sight, rear sight, alignment, sight picture, shot taken? Bring the gun back down. Bring the sight picture back up, priming your vision to pick up those sights at the distance they're usually going to be at when you shoot. This is your full arm extension, so you know the sights are roughly going to be in that focal plane, so you get used to the idea of acquiring those sights faster and faster and faster and faster. And then of course you can see, is there any small shortcuts I can take in that sight picture to still provide the same results relative to the distance that I'm shooting at? This is deliberate practice. Seeking out and exploring ways to get the same result as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So, and again, this has been brought up before. I've talked about practice before. I'm sure I'm going to talk about it again. But deliberate practice, I brought it up when I talked about recommended reading. The book called Peak is a great book to talk about for deliberate practice because the book literally is about deliberate practice, or at least the majority of it talks about deliberate practice and how you can take what's in there and just the idea of the concept and apply it to your own practice that you're going to do. One thing with self-defense shooting is a lot of the metrics that can exist, we can't practice for. We don't know the conditions, the times, the lighting, the environment, the temperature, anything. We're not able to predict the future in that way, so we have to take appreciable metrics from range shooting and hope they're going to help us out when it comes time for self-defense shooting if that unfortunate situation arises. But there is some ways that you can have a better understanding of how those things are going to work for you. Force on force classes are probably the best option we have currently. If you don't have access to that or you don't have the budget for it, you can get 2 airsoft pistols and a friend. It's not perfect, it's not quite the same thing, but it will give you an appreciation for what you're doing correctly and what maybe you're doing either incorrectly or can be done more efficiently. Because if you don't know about your sloppy use of cover because you've never been shot using cover, or if you don't know that it's really hard for you to track a moving target because you've never tracked a moving target, and having that moving target then give you feedback on how well you hit is actually really, really useful. Of course, we don't want it devolving into a game, at least if we're deliberately practicing something. You can let it devolve into a game after you're done, and there's nothing wrong with that. Explore the concepts that you can explore and find shortcuts around the artificialities we get from training. Airsoft is a great shortcut. I don't really like the term shortcut because I don't believe there are any shortcuts in firearms training, but it's a good medium to practice those potential eventualities in, or those potentials in. So that's an aspect that we can explore as well. And then, you can obviously think outside the box, like find ways to push your skill level, find ways to practice things in very unorthodox ways if you're already efficient at them. If you're really good at reloading the handgun, you feel like your reload from concealment is really fast, really proficient, it's really consistent, try it sitting down, try it laying down, try it on your back, try these other different things to see if your technique applies like water to any situation you might physically find yourself in. And this is something that I could talk on for hours. Usually when I teach a class, I give a block of instruction on deliberate practice because you take what you learn in training and you practice it to proficiency, which we already talked about in the video. But I think I pretty much answered the question. Deliberately focus on the small inefficiencies you're making in the task that you're trying to accomplish and work on them one at a time. And once you've fixed and you've consistently fixed that one problem, then you start working on the next one. If there isn't a next one, then you increase or decrease, depending on which metric we're talking about, the difficulty. So I may shoot at a further distance or hold myself to a quicker time. Or I may hold myself to a tighter, consistent accuracy. So once we established that we're able to perform under the task that we set out for ourselves, we should make it harder. And eventually you'll get to the point where you find like I can't compete at this level until I continue to rep it and get the proficiency and build in the subconscious competence that I need to perform this. And then my skill level becomes higher and higher and higher and higher to where I get to that point where my higher functioning problems are worlds away from where I started. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.